cell phone? I do. It was 1990 and I was the director of community services for the city of Monrovia. And the city manager directed for us to purchase through the city cell phones so that he might get in touch with all of us and so that the city council would have easy access to us basically 24/7. And what amazes me about that cell phone is the fact that the battery on it was probably the size of a VCR cartridge.
Yeah.
In its entirety, it was about the size of a Science of Mind textbook. And literally, the mouthpiece and the earpiece that you would pick up to talk on was attached like a regular telephone cord that you would pull up and you would talk on. Now you have to look at your phones. And they're no longer just about telephone calls. How many of us keep our daily calendars on them? How many of us do our banking? Or quickly when we're waiting in the doctor's office, pull it out and do a quick game? Or check our internet? Or you see them on airplanes where people are actually watching TV or movies on this tiny little screen. One of the things that I like the most about it is the fact that it takes pictures. So I always have a camera with me. Now, how about your first computer? Remember that one too? It was huge. And what I tried to find but couldn't was a floppy that was about this size. Remember, everything was saved on a floppy that was about 5 by 5. Now I save everything on a stick or a thumb drive. This can easily fit in my pocket, where this could certainly not. And of course we become frustrated because they don't move fast enough anymore. You know, it's like, come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. And now, of course, my computer is my little iPad. And remember the traveling salesman that came around and knocked on your parents' doors and asked them to buy World Book or Britannica encyclopedia so that you would be well educated as children? Well, encyclopedias are almost a thing of the past as we begin to use our internet to find out all of our current information. Same thing is happening with newspapers because we can get up-to-minute information off the internet almost instantaneously, or the LA Times, the New York Times, the Chico Enterprise Record is all delivered right there on my computer. And of course, we pay bills, we check on our stocks. There isn't anything that we can't do on the internet. Now, this little handy-dandy iPad was introduced in April of 2010. And now I can carry on this iPad my dictionary, my thesaurus, my Bible, my Science of Mind text, a Bible concordance, as well as a multitude of other books with me at all times. That, of course, doesn't include the movies, the music, the internet, just by the flick of a switch. They estimate that by the end of 2014, 250 million tablets will be sold in America. They estimate that 1 billion of the smartphones will be sold by the end of this year. And of course, now we have Google glasses. Have you seen them? They're about this thick. They come across. You can check the internet. You can make your telephone calls. You can take pictures with them, and they're a set of glasses that fit over your ears so that you don't even have to pick up the phone to make a call. We, as people, are fascinated with newness. We crave the latest and the greatest in our life that will make our life easier, that allows us to have everything right at our fingertips. But what does newness mean? Webster's tells us much. There was quite a list in the dictionary, but some of those that I picked out happen to be never existed before, not previously used, existed before but known or discovered for the very first time, beginning again. Let me repeat the last three. Not previously used, existed before, but known or discovered for the first time, and beginning again. Every January, my roses in my yard begin again. It's that time of the year when they must be trimmed back so that they will flourish in the spring and throughout the summer. And for me, it's quite a process. I have over 60 bushes. And so it takes me 4 weeks to trim them all back, basically because I can only fill so many bushes in the trash can at one time. So it's a 4-week process for me. And every year I'm absolutely amazed by the fact that I will go from branches that are this tall, 6 to 8 feet, and cut them back to be about knee height, and they flourish and come back even greater than ever before. Now, my dad had over 80 bushes in his yard. It was a huge corner lot that my parents had. I won't tell you either that they had 1,000 glads. He was quite the gardener. And he taught me how to trim my rose bushes. And what I'd like to share with you today is the similarities between trimming our rose bushes and how that is very similar to our spiritual journey in life. Now, initially, when you start out, you have to have the right tools. And of course, to handle the rose bushes, you got to have gloves. Because these things are extremely thorny as you go along. Not only do you have to have gloves, you got to have loppers, and you got to have clippers. Now, the difference between these two is this cuts the big stuff, and this cuts the little stuff. And of course, this is what I end up using all year long to go out and count down to that place where there's 5 leaves, like there, and clip off to get a rose. But this is the one that I go back in and I go to the large parts of the stem, or the one that allows me to go way down in the bottom and get it good. Each has a very specific purpose. And these tools allow me to trim my roses. When you're spiritually growing, you need tools too. Science of Mind text, classes, maybe a CD to meditate, like Gina and Sharon share. A journal to write in, to express and explain what's transpiring within your life. Monthly practitioner sessions, classes. All of those things are tools, much like the loppers and the gloves, that assist you in growing. Now, when we trim our roses, we have to begin where we can. As you can see, literally some of the branches on my rose bushes get to be 8 feet tall as they grow. So I can't start out right at the bottom of the bush. I have to start clipping and cutting down slowly. So each branch or each bush is different, much like each and every one of you is different. And when I look at that rose bush and I begin to cut it, I realize that I have to begin where it's ready to be cut. Each of us begins our spiritual journey where we're ready to begin, where we're ready to deepen and grow spiritually. Now, some of you, I remember, myself, when I was learning to meditate, and I did not like it at all. So initially what I did is I set my timer for 5 minutes. 5 minutes, if I could just sit still for 5 minutes. 5 minutes became 6, became 10, became 15. It gradually expanded in time. When you begin a spiritual journey or a spiritual growth process, you have to begin where you are. Don't expect to sit down and start meditating 20 minutes at a pop. Begin where you are for the greatest growth. When we trim a rose bush, our purpose is to shape it to allow greater growth. Before I begin each bush, I must examine it and create in my own mind a vision for how I'm going to cut it, what I want it to look like when I'm done. And much like trimming a bush, each of us must have a vision for our spiritual growth. We can't just jump in and say, oh, this is what it's going to be. We have to have a vision. Otherwise, we may potentially end up going in a direction that we do not want to go. So what would your ideal practice be like? Where would you begin anew tomorrow? The important thing is not how long we initially spend in that spiritual practice or in our prayer chair, but rather that we make a commitment to do it, that we begin. If I didn't trim my bushes each year, they would begin to look ugly. The roses would turn to pods. Nothing would continue to grow except sporadically. And if I wasn't dedicated in trimming those bushes and having that vision, then I wouldn't have that beauty within my yard. And if we don't create a dedicated spiritual practice in our life, then our growth will be limited. It won't be beautiful. Dad always said to clear the center of the bush. He said it allowed for greater circulation within the bush and to allow more light into the bush, which roses need. Roses need plenty of lights. They can't grow in the dark. Our spiritual growth, much like the rose, doesn't begin on the outside. It begins on the inside. It begins within us. A spiritual journey or spiritual growth is inside to the outside, not the outside to the inside. We need to see what is hidden on the inside that needs to be healed, released, and let go. And it is not easy. I'd be the first one to tell you. It means using fear to faith worksheets so that we can discover what our hidden fears and hurts are so that those things can be healed. We must understand that what is being mirrored back to us by others is really that which we need to heal within ourselves. How often have you been upset because of some way someone treated you or some unkind words that they said to you? And yet, really, it's just a reflection of something deep within yourself that needs to be healed and released and let go. You know, it's a hard job to heal from the inside out. But when it's done, more light comes in, like the center of the rose bush. Have you ever been around a rose bush and you know how tall the suckers can get to be? You can always tell what the suckers are. They get kind of a funky green and they shoot straight up and it's a different kind of leaf and there's no bud at the end of the sucker. And they always come from right there at the beginning of the roots. Now, suckers drain the rose bush of its natural beauty. Suckers prevent the bush from creating more and bigger roses because they drain the energy from the rose bush. How many of us have suckers in our life? And I'm not talking about the kind that you pop into your mouth and enjoy. All of us have suckers. It might be a person or a group of people that has clung to us for far too long. How many of us have stayed in relationships or marriages just one more year to see if we couldn't make it go? And yet it drained us of our energy. It drained us of who we are. Or then again, it might be stuff that we've hung onto far too long. Recently, I had to rearrange my father's room at a care facility because he has become permanently wheelchair bound. And so it meant rearranging some of the furniture within his room, and so I went in and decided it was time to clean out. He had lived there for about 11 years. I found 12 pair of pajamas. And I said, Dad, what do you need 12 pair? Well, I don't want to let them go. And 3/4 of them he could no longer wear because they were too small. Or the one that I really got the chuckle out of was the 4 razors one for each hand and each foot, electric razors. You know, when I moved my parents from their house, which was 2,400 square feet, to the assisted living facility where my dad still is, my niece who was helping me, we kept a list of all the things that we found that we kind of chuckled about. 18 pounds of spaghetti, 115 pounds of sugar, 40 pounds of flour, more than 1 case of vegetables or tomato paste. And the real clincher for me was 64 chicken and turkey wishbones, stuffed away in a closet. I asked my mother, I said, what do you do with these? She said, oh, we take them as gag gifts when we're asked to bring a gag gift. I thought, who wants a turkey wishbone as a gag gift? So she kept 64 of them. Clutter in our home. Clutter in our offices, clutter in our cars, are suckers. They're the suckers in our life that drain us of our energy. What are the suckers that you need to release? Next, you need to get rid of the little stuff. Now, you can see by these that some of the branches will go all the way to being 2 inches in diameter. But it's the tiny little stuff on the bush that when I'm trimming it back to make it go that I have to cut. The little slivers that are about the size of a toothpick or a pencil, those all have to be cut back. Because it's the little stuff that drains the rose bush. It's the little stuff in our life that drains us. It's the little stuff that we stew about. You know, you wake up in the middle of the night and you're still thinking about what somebody said to you. That's the little stuff. It drains us. And while the little branches may ultimately become large, when we trim them, it's important that they're cut so that that the rest of the rose bush gets the full energy so that it can flourish in the spring. And yet sometimes it's hard to get the little stuff. Yet it's often the little stuff that clutters up our life. It's the little stuff that we keep stewing about over and over and over again. We're tethered to our past with that little stuff. Through spiritual practice, we can let go of that little stuff. Next, it's important to remove the dead branches. This is just one example of a dead branch. And I'd also point out, see how everything on it is cut at an angle? These branches are sometimes harder to remove, and sometimes they're quite a bit larger, but you can tell that they're dead, and we got to get in there with a saw because they're bigger than what the loppers will allow me to remove. And by removing them, we open up space for new growth. I remember when my brother died, there were some things that I was unable to let go of, so I hung on to them. I clung to them not because the item was important, not because I needed it, but rather because of the memory that it represented. We hang on to things way too long in our life because of the memories long after the item has served its purpose within our life or within someone else's life. So what is the dead wood in your life that needs to be released? Sometimes it isn't a thing, but it's rather a hurt, an anger, or even a relationship that has lingered too long. When all is cut away, we must clean the debris from around the plant. And of course, what I've discovered long ago is the fact that you just can't, after the bush begins to really grow in the spring, you can't always get down there and remove the weeds. You can't get to the leaves that have kind of accumulated on the inside of it. And I hate those little pesky weeds. Oh, God. And they drain the plant of the nutrients around it that are within the soil that allows it to grow. And weeds within each and every one of us prevents us from having our spiritual growth. And we must be diligent in recognizing them and then removing those weeds from our life. Finally, all of our cuts must be clean. If the cut that I make ends up being jagged, then the bush will more than likely lose that limb. My spiritual mentor is often fond of saying, incomplete endings makes incomplete beginnings. So whatever we do, it must be clean and it must be complete. Only then will new growth be nurtured. So what is it that you need to cut away so that new inner growth can begin? Through the years, I've learned that whenever Spirit reveals herself, she brings newness into my life. God always brings newness, even in the most challenging and difficult times. Newness requires our trust and our faith. Change, which is what newness really is all about, is like a skin peeling off of a snake. It's slow, it's sticky, and sometimes the snake has to rub up against a tree or a hard rock to be able to pull itself through that skin. But in the end, when we've released our outer skin, we'll realize that it was worth it all to get to the new place and the new person that lives within. Remember, newness is about beginning again, just like the rose bush begins anew each and every spring. I stood in my yard just recently and looked around and thought, oh God, I hope they come back. I hope they come back.
They will.
They will. Indeed, they will. And those rose bushes remind me about my spiritual practice, so that we can discover for the first time what lies deep within ourselves and begin to use what we've never ever known before. Emily Cady, in a book entitled Lessons in Truth, said, we are in the process of growth into the highest spiritual manhood and womanhood. We get many falls and bumps on the way, but only through these, not necessarily by them, can our growth proceed. Father and mother, no matter how strong or deep their love, cannot grow for their children, nor can God, who is omnipotent, at the center of our being, grow spiritually for us without making us automations instead of individuals. So I would ask you, how will you trim your roses in the weeks to come, so that the beautiful rose that lives deep within you unfolds in perfection? This is the truth in my life, and this is the truth in yours. And so it is. And I'm going to switch a little bit. Cecile, I'm going to ask you to come up and do